Welcome and thank you for joining us for this Jumpstart India ISB webinar on reforms in the agriculture sector. We have three eminent panelists with us to help us understand what these reforms mean for the various players in the agricultural sector. These reforms, as you'll be familiar, primarily are geared towards marketing of farm produce and the trade of these commodities. Specifically, these reforms now allow trade outside of the APMC markets. They enable and provide a framework for contract farming norms and relax provisions of the Essential Commodities Act that have often be the cause for preventing large-scale public sector participation in this sector. And as you know, these reforms were announced as part of the COVID-19 relief package. However, as the nature of these reforms and the intent when bringing in these reforms made it clear, they will have a long-term impact on the agricultural sector in India. Now, as of today, the ordinances associated with these reforms have already been promulgated. However, the rules governing the implementation of these ordinances are still being framed and are likely to be announced any day now. We are hoping to use today's discussion to understand what these reforms mean for these sectors, namely farmers, private sector agribusinesses, and the government, and also shed some light on what the next steps needed are so as to align the different players' interests and to truly improve the agricultural sector in India. I would like to take a few minutes to introduce each of the three speakers that we have for today's session. We have Dr. Abhilaksh Likhi, Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Department of Agriculture, Cooperation and Farmer Welfare at the Government of India. Dr. Likhi has over 25 years of experience as a senior development professional in the Indian Administrative Service, and he's worked at the grassroots and later in policy formulation capacities in sectors that include agriculture, animal husbandry, and dairy development. In the past, he's also served as Principal Secretary Agriculture and Principal Secretary Animal Husbandry and Dairy Development in the Government of Haryana, and as a short-term consultant at the World Bank in the Human Development, Knowledge Management, and South Asia Sustainable and Livelihood Divisions. He's also a Fulbright Hubert H. Humphrey alumni and holds a Master in International Public Policy from the School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University, Washington, D.C. Welcome, Dr. Likhi. We also have Mr. Sivakumar, the Group Head for Agri and IT businesses at ITC Limited. He was the Divisional Chief Executive of ITC's Agri Business Division from 1996 to 2017, during which time the eChopal initiative that all of you are familiar with was developed and executed under his leadership. He also serves in the Commodity Derivatives Advisory Committee of SEBI and on the Management Committee of National Agricultural Higher Education Project of the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. He's been a member on the boards of NABARD and IRMA and was also the chairman of the National Agricultural Council of the CII and vice chairman of the UN Global Compact's Core Advisory Group to develop sustainable agricultural business principles. Thank you, Mr. Sivakumar, for joining us today. Our third panelist is Mr. Ajay Vir Jakhar. He's a farmer and chairman of the Bharat Krishak Samaj. He's also the chairman of the Punjab State Farmers and Farm Workers Commission. Bharat Krishak Samaj was formed in 1955 and is a non-political association of farmers advocating for farmer prosperity. Bharat Krishak Samaj regularly holds seminars and conferences on issues of relevance to the farming community and participates and represents farmers at various national and international forums such as the World Economic Forum. Thank you, Mr. Jakhar, for giving us your time for today's discussion. Before we get started with the discussion, a quick note on housekeeping. I know that a lot of you have many questions and some of you have already sent in your questions. If you haven't already done so or have additional questions as we go through today's discussion, please use the Q&A window on your Zoom application to send in your questions to the panelists. We will try and address as many of these questions as time permits towards the end of the discussion. I would like to start off today's discussion by inviting each of our panelists to provide their opening remarks on the reforms. We will start with Dr. Likhi, followed by Mr. Sivakumar and then Mr. Jakhar. I would like the speakers to talk about what these reforms mean for the government, private sector agri-businesses, and farmers respectively, in terms of enabling a quick recovery from the COVID-19 induced crisis, as well as enhancing long-term welfare. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Likhi.
Good evening to all participants who are in this webinar today. A very good evening to my esteemed co-panelists, Shri Ajay Jakhar and Shri Sivakumar. Thanks, Aaditya and Sripad, for having me here at ISB. It's an honor, it's a privilege. The topic for the day, as you outlined, is reforms in agriculture in India in these challenging times of the COVID pandemic. Just to put things in perspective, ever since the Honorable Prime Minister set the goal of doubling farmers' income by 2022, the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare, through its various schemes, programs, and projects, has been working in partnership with state governments to see that implementation takes place of these schemes. There also has been a consistent effort to identify and plug bottlenecks, if any, at the last mile by leapfrogging technology, which is most important. And this is with the aim of ensuring accountability, transparency, and generating awareness, especially amongst small and marginal farmers who form 80% of the farming community. I would not like to rattle out numbers, but to name a few important schemes, I think we have the direct benefit transfer through one of the biggest schemes called PM Kisan, directly into the farmer's account. We, of course, have our MSP, minimum support price purchases. We have the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, the livestock scheme, which again in its reformed avatar is now a voluntary scheme. Many other schemes which are critical on areas such as micro irrigation, organic farming, farm mechanization, soil health, etc. While I'm not an expert, but having served in the state government in the state government of Haryana, and now in Government of India, I think two transitions are absolutely visible in the agriculture sector. One, from the days of the Green Revolution, where we focused on food security, now we are emphasizing and focusing on the real farmers of income, number one. Number two, we are looking at more intensively nutritional security, because nutrition becomes important at the end of the day. And number two, in terms of economics, I think as the economy structurally transforms, we see a transition in terms of employment from agriculture to services and manufacturing, and concomitantly from the rural to urban. So the question is, where will the jobs come from? And I think agri-business value chains are the place. Industries like storage, processing, pack houses, that's where the jobs are going to come to. Now, as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, a lot of challenges have come about for the agriculture sector. And I am in fact reminded of a very positive and motivating story, which I have shared on Outlook in one of my articles, of a marginal farmer from Chitrakota village in Ranchi, Jharkhand, by the name of Kiran Khalko. Now, during the pandemic, and for the first time from the farm gate, she was able to sell 15 quintals of watermelon through the E-National Agriculture Market, which we popularly call E-NAM, with the help of the market committee. Now, her sale of rupees 8 per kg fetched her an income of rupees 12,000. 12,000 may not be a big figure for you and me, but it's definitely for a marginal farmer. And the money was paid directly into her account. The point I'm making is that the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, in which announcements pertaining to the agriculture sector were made by the Honorable Finance Minister, the purpose is to empower small and marginal farmers. In that direction, I think, as you rightly mentioned, two major ordinances have been promulgated. The first ordinance is the ordinance pertaining to trade and commerce. And I think I will not go into all the features. One of the key features is the freedom to the farmer to sell where he likes, what he likes at the farm gate, or take it to the wholesale regulated market. So it is barrier free. He goes interstate, he can do it intrastate. And at the end of the day, it also facilitates spot buying, but also provides facilitation for any kind of buying or selling through an electronic platform, I think, which is why we talk of leapfrogging technology. The other ordinance is, as you mentioned, the farming agreement ordinance, which is between the sponsor and the farmer. Aggregators as bulk buyers, processors can also be a part. This ordinance is different in a manner that it provides a very flexible pricing mechanism. It talks of quality, grades, and standards. It provides protection to the farmer. So what we are looking at the end of the day is an ecosystem which is barrier-free, ecosystem which is farmer-centric, an ecosystem where the farmer is free to sell to whomever he likes. But I'm sure you would agree, and so would my panelists, that for this ecosystem to flower, to come into being, you need a lot of inflow of investment. So the government of India has taken the initiative as a part of the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan of setting up an agriculture infrastructure fund of 1 lakh crores. And the two important features which I'd like to bring to the notice of participants and the panelists is that one, this infrastructure fund of 1 lakh crores will enable us to take projects right at the farm gate, right at the aggregation points such as PACs and farmer producer organizations. And in fact, and these will be for post-harvest management activities, which I mentioned in the beginning are the biggest job creators, pack houses, ripening chambers, reefer vans, etc., etc. But funds will also be available in a very big way to agri startups. You know, the whole ecology of agri startups, about 400 plus in the country, who are doing a fantastic job in terms of adding to the value chain in agriculture. And of course, agri entrepreneurs in rural areas whom we'd like to be associated either with the post-harvest management or with our extension machinery to carry the right messages to farmers. So this is a major fund which is coming up. Of course, we have a huge database of farmers in terms of PM Kisan, almost about 9 crores. So a mission mode provision of 2 lakh crores to drive credit boost by covering 2.5 lakh PM Kisan farmers under the Kisan Credit Scheme. There is also a focus on secondary agriculture, which is a beekeeping mission. I mean, something which is income earning. And so 500 crores has been allocated for an integrated development of the beekeeping mission. The point is not the amounts. The point is not the schemes. The point is what kind of an ecosystem we are trying to develop in wake of these two ordinances. Just 3 major reforms, because as we sit in the ministry today, I'm very happy to be a part of an ecosystem within the ministry where we are in the implementation mode, where we are in the listening mode. Now, one major scheme which is being brought in is the scheme pertaining to farmer producer organizations. We know a small and marginal farmer on his own vis-a-vis a small and marginal farmers in a collective having economies of scale. So 10,000 FPOs are going to be set up in the coming future. But the interesting point, the innovation in the scheme is, one, it's going to be a geographical cluster with a commodity that the FPO takes up. Number 2, we are going to have community-based business organizations for the first time helping implementing agencies, which could be a private sector agency, which could be a public sector agency, helping and hand-holding FPOs. So we bring in private sector in a big way. And finally, the biggest problem with FPOs getting bank loans and getting bank projects appraised. So up to 2 crores, you're going to have credit guarantee also available within this scheme. The second area of reform that we are looking at in a very major way, as the ordinance on trade provides for a facilitative framework for electronic trading platforms. Currently, we have ENAM, which I mentioned, helped a small marginal farmer in Ranchi. Now, the ENAM, interestingly, is leading to discovery of online prices, but its backend is located in a wholesale regulated market. There are about 1,000 markets where you have ENAM and price discovery is happening. We want it to be an interoperable platform of platforms. Mr. Sivakumar will bear with me. E-Chopal was a scheme which I read about when I was in college preparing for the exams. And now as we transition from pre-harvest to harvest to post-harvest, how do we bring in players like KisanMandi.com, Khet Gadi, AgriBazaar, Entelo Labs, Godambala, government systems of e-Khareed, or e-commerce players like Big Basket and eBay? How do we bring them on ENAM How do we make it a platform of platforms? We are looking at this. During the pandemic times, a very interesting problem was faced by all of us. And this was, if a farmer in Kerala on Enam buys something from Punjab, how does he transport the material? Now, agri-logistics was a big bottleneck. And we all in the ministry came up with a project where we have now launched, with the help of NIC, a portal and an app called Kisan Rath, wherein the interesting thing is that we have partnered with 8 online providers like Truck Suvidha, Rivigo, Black Buck. And as a result, during the pandemic, 7 lakh trucks were available for any kind of operations to happen in Enam and non-Enam mandis. I think these are the kind of issues which are important as we reform. And finally, I think the big question which I'm asked by students wherever I talk of the ministry's reform agenda, experts and shareholders, what do we do with the database? Agriculture is huge. What do we do? So I would like to share with you that right now in the ministry, as a result of PM Kisan, we have a voluminous database of 9 crore farmers sitting in the ministry. This is the database which is going to be a building block for the digital agri stack that we are planning for the future. And this agri stack, which is actively under consideration, is going to roll out with the help of artificial intelligence, blockchain, etc., services pertaining to DBT, direct benefit transfer, weather, crop advisories, etc., etc. Finally, I think it's not, as I say, a question of just naming schemes. What is the ecosystem we are looking at, and what is the way ahead? I think I would personally feel one size fit all does not work for a country of India's size. And in this, one of the key important issue is that states have to be our partners and we have to partner with them. For instance, when I was working in Haryana, I have seen a scheme go through which is currently being implemented at a cost of 500 crores, and it's called the Crop Cluster Development Program. What they're basically doing is to help small and marginal farmers to be connected to primary processing facilities. How do they do it? The entire state and all the villages have been mapped into vegetable or fruit clusters with full mapping. Now, in any one cluster, an integrated pack house or will be run by an FPO that will be provided credit-linked subsidy. And parallelly, extension services have been outsourced to the private sector. I think this is a great example of an innovation in the field. And these are the kinds of projects in states where a lot of enhancement of income, we aim at doubling farmers' income, a lot of enhancement of income has currently happened. The issue of healthy food is also very relevant. I think our food systems have to transform. We see that in large part of the country, we have issues of nutrition, stunting, wasting in children, obesity, various kinds of diseases. Therefore, our food systems in terms of organic and health have to be a major focus. I cannot discount the importance of changing climate, reducing our energy bills as far as agriculture is concerned, very important. But finally, I think we have a very robust extension system in our Krishi Vigyan Kendras, and I have shared this across in my writings wherever I've written, that Krishi Vigyan Kendras, with the help of the private sector, have to carry forward this reform agenda with these 2 ordinances and reach out to the small and marginal farmers, because unless we do that, the reform agenda remains absolutely incomplete. With these words, I would like to end. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Likhi. Mr. Sivakumar, if you would like to add to those comments and provide us your perspectives.
Thank you, Sripad, and good afternoon to both my fellow panelists and the moderators and all the participants. Basically, I'll pick up in my opening remarks one ordinance and talk about what it means. And then in the process, obviously, other elements will also come in. The trade and commerce ordinance related to the farming produce. And contrast it with the system that otherwise is been there as APMC ecosystem, and what the APMC was meant to achieve, what it accomplished, and what are the limitations that this reform is now attempting to remove, and therefore possibly what kind of benefits it might deliver to the consumers, and therefore the value capture for the farmers and for the businesses that are part of that value chain. Now, the APMC, when it was conceived 50 years ago, basically it was, besides other things, two primary benefits. One was to try and discover the prices in a competitive manner. For the farmers otherwise who were selling off to the traders in the villages as the primary means of selling, this meant a fair discovery of prices, and with more competitors bidding for the same lot, the prices would be more likely to be higher than what they would possibly get in the villages. So that was one element of competitive price discovery. The second is the efficiency of logistics. The logistics of this price discovery process, as well as more importantly, the logistics efficiency in aggregation of produce. All our farmers being smaller, obviously this needs to move along the chain, and all our consumers are also smaller. And therefore, you need to aggregate the produce and disaggregate. And mandis were one important hub for that aggregation. So these were the two primary elements that the APMC Act was delivering. It obviously helped to the extent of improving the farm price realization. It was an important element of the larger agriculture and food agenda of the government in the form of minimum support prices, the MSP, the public research system, and so on, and brought us the relative self-sufficiency of agriculture from what was a ship-to-mouth situation to surpluses, barring, of course, where consumers cannot afford, and some of those kind of challenges apart. But we today are net exporters of agricultural produce. So that is the kind of a transformation that's been accomplished. But along this journey, we also obviously have faced certain limitations, which became even more in the last 20 years. As the consumers evolved, and there's a segment of consumers who are willing to pay a higher price for better value, be it in the form of variety or quality or convenience, safety that Dr. Likhi pointed out, and nutrition, the wellness, all of these different consumer expectations from food, and similarly in other products, whether it is fiber or feed or fuel as may be relevant, but let me touch upon food and say these expectations were there. But in order to deliver these expectations, you need to preserve identity of the produce after it is brought to the mandi or after the farmer has produced in the first instance. For a simple value chain like atta, because of which e-chopal became quite popular and scale, is because all wheat is considered as just wheat and all atta is atta. But the consumers at one end of atta consumption in different parts of the country look for the traits in atta as they prefer depending on their own cuisine habits in terms of the color of atta, the granularity of atta, and the dough keeping quality and the softness of chapati, and so on and so forth. Now, in order to make that consistently available, you need to blend different kinds of wheat with those properties on a consistent manner to deliver this. See, so long as it was a shortages economy and as long as wheat was available, it was not an issue. It was fine, which was the situation for several decades. Over the last 20 years, as the incomes have increased and awareness has improved and all the other features that I pointed out, when consumers started looking for this, one of the limitations of the APMC mandis was that the identity of the wheat, once it is brought to the mandi, gets aggregated, commingled with other produce, and then moves on in the rest of the value chain. And it was not possible for any player to then disaggregate and segregate all that wheat and then make the consistent quality of atta available. And as a result, our own packaged atta as a proportion of the total atta consumption remained a very abysmally small percentage even compared to the neighboring Pakistan, for example. So that identity preservation, because of the very aggregation that was supposed to be done in the mandis for efficiency purpose, became a limiting factor for preserving the identity of the produce. On the other hand, farmer actually produces many varieties of wheat. We have at the top end things like Sharbati, then there's a Lokwan, then there is Raj, and many other newer varieties which also have similar kind of chemical properties. But because the conventional mandi to a large degree, and certainly the government procurement to the FCI, does not factor in these varieties and qualities while those prices get determined. Obviously, all of these has an implication in terms of how the supply chain gets managed and the consumer value doesn't get delivered, and therefore the business opportunity gets lower. And of course, in the earlier dispensation, when we had the APMC reform carried out by certain states, we had an opportunity to implement the e-Chopal model and procure directly from the farmer, preserve the identity, and move the produce and deliver the Ashirwad brand. And because it could deliver, it became popular and #1 brand within no time. But the challenge that was there in the APMC reform, even to the extent it happened, is that we were to get year-to-year licenses from different states. And some years, certain state governments are actually seen ITC as a competition to government procurement, and said that no, we'll only give you licenses a few weeks after the wheat season commences, after we complete our procurement. We have the uncertainty in terms of when we will get licensed, when we will buy wheat, and so on. Whereas the new Trade and Commerce Act, which opens up the direct engagement with the farmers without any such limitations of licensing by the different states, therefore clears up the path to preserve identity. And on the same path, of course, you require for organic produce traceability all the way to farm produce and other elements. But this is one aspect which the Act opens up. The second is from a farmer's point of view. The first one I talked about consumer, and second one from a farmer's perspective, is that at the time of planting, ideally the farmer should get the demand signal and the potential price that he or she can fetch for the produce. To the extent of a few grains and oil seeds where the minimum support price operates are in one or the other form, like Bhavantar Yojana and all that, there is that kind of a visibility of what I should plant and what I'll get. But for a large majority of the crops, there is no such visibility that the farmers have. And because the APMC system reduces the relationship between the farmer and a buyer of the farmer to very transactional mode, that I am the best bidder for the day, I get the produce, and whoever is the supplier then gets it, and thereafter there is no relationship between the farmer and the buyer of the produce, be it a processor or a retailer, an agribusiness company, or the Aaditya through whom all of these players operate or the commissioner. Now, with that kind of a relationship being transactional, the way to deliver that demand signals as to this particular variety is going to be more in demand, and this crop is going to be more in demand, and therefore, how do you really make the production system more responsive to these demand signals? So that mechanism is missing from the APMC, and which is now getting opened up, saying that there is a potential relationship and an engagement that can be set up between farmer and rest of the value chain. And each value chain requires its own mechanism of how the prices signals can be given, what level of risk and reward gets shared between the farmer and rest of the value chain, and so on. And those innovations will now happen. And Dr. Likhi talked about many startups coming in, leveraging the digital technologies and so on to be able to personalize this engagement with the farmers. I think as they all get aggregated, we will hopefully see many innovations. And on our own part, right now, the e-Chopal is now in its version 4.0, which is an aggregator of many such startups to deliver integrated services for the farmers. But the idea here basically is that once you produce the demand signals and then make the production system respond to it, so that is a means for protecting and enhancing the incomes of the farmer. And that long-term engagement can also contribute to adoption of the right varieties and better productivity by combining the knowledge of the farmer on one side and that of the other ecosystem, and then ensure that the larger incomes remain high, although not necessarily price as the only means to taking up the income, because that has implications on the demand side. So I think this is the other thing which opens up because of this. So I think that's how it is transformational. If Indian agenda of multiplying farmer incomes and in the first instance doubling in the near-term horizon has to happen, it has to be by creating a larger value for the consumer, be competitive and capture a fair value for the farmer. And I think this ordinance is for that particular agenda is extremely critical. And that's where I leave for now, while there are all the other elements which will also supplement all of this, but I'll flag the most crucial part of the reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sivakumar. If Mr. Jakhar, you can build on some of these points and talk about what it means for farmers.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, ISB, for this opportunity, and Likhi ji and Sivakumar ji have very, I think so, rightly explained all the points. I'll just try and touch upon as a farmer, because you see the states and the farmers were not consulted when these ordinances were made. Only the corporate houses were consulted when these ordinances was made. So I will try and find assumptions on why the government came out with these ordinances in the first place to explain them better. The first assumption I think the government and the public in India has is that India is a food secure country. Let me very clearly say that we appear to be a cereal surplus country. Our surpluses show today because the per capita purchasing capacity, per capita fruit, vegetable and protein consumption is amongst the lowest in the world. And our purchasing capacity is appallingly low. So people cannot buy fruits, vegetables and proteins, and which could be meat, eggs, chicken, or even cereal consumption. And that is why the government has to go for free doling out of cereals, as very rightly the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister has done. So one of the assumptions I think that the government is acting on is that we have excess stocks, and so we can afford to loosen the markets and regulations and allow the private sector to come in. Second is that the past policies of the government, whether the state government or the central government over the last few decades, and when I say government, please, as a explanation, it doesn't refer to these last 6 years of distress. It refers to the last 20 years or 25 years of problems we have failed to deliver to the expectations of farmers and to policymakers themselves. So there was the urge to change something. The third is that the central government was supposed to make these APMC's market work over 20, 30 years. And as Sivakumar ji has rightly pointed out, that APMC markets became a hurdle. Now, rather than trying to solve that hurdle, we have tried to kick the hurdle out of the door. And that I think so is wrong. Just to say that what was wrong with old APMC does not justify what has been done. We must very clearly differentiate between what has been. An explanation could come there. And I would say the same. The governance fails because the Aaditiyas and the middlemen are financially and politically, they have huge clout. They pay state politicians that they don't allow APMCs to work as ITC, or even as a farmer, both of us would want them to work. And so governments did not invest money, time and effort in improving that. Otherwise, the solutions were there. Similarly, it's happened for extension services. I'm just trying to give you an example where government is unable to do something. It is asking and hoping the private sector will deliver. If government is in a way abdicating its responsibilities. Governments are not investing in extension services and agriculture research. And that has bearings to what Sivakumar ji is saying about quality produce, about different varieties coming in and things like that. We have 50% vacancy in government farm extension. We have 50% vacancy in agriculture research. We have probably nearly 0% livestock extension. We may have vets, but that's not extension. That's like a primary healthcare for animals. It's vague. And I'm talking generally across all states. Now, what does the government do? The government says, yes, KVKs will work with private sector and deliver extension. Very good. I'm not against it. As a farmer, I think we need private sector to go forward. But at the same time, we must acknowledge that government has responsibilities. It cannot abdicate to the private sector. It will be responsible for health. It will be responsible for education. It will be responsible for for farm extension. Moving forward, so these are some things we have to do. And also, so if we quickly come to, so rather than say what I find, what we find wrong with these issues, I'll just try and say what we can do going forward, because it's obviously this government, some people would want to say. So my suggestions in this few minutes are going to be on what can be done to these ordinances to make them deliver faster and better, what exactly Likhi wants that these deliver. So if we come to APMC markets, the biggest problem is that 15 crore farmers are going to be selling their produce, trading their produce in areas which are unregulated by state governments, where mandi fees is not going to be charged. It's like saying buying shares in the stock market and not having a SEBI, not having a registrar of companies and leaving it free for all. You have to have some sort of regulation. You cannot say there will be no regulation. And to say that at some stage you can go to the SDM in a tehsil or something doesn't make sense, because the SDMs don't have time for work. I mean, you cannot go, farmers do not have that ability to go and acquire. Similarly, if states do not collect taxes on agriculture produce, how are they going and why are they going to be investing in rural link roads? Why are they going to be investing in these mandis that are required? The explanation that many government officials will give is that state governments invest in government hospitals, they invest in rural education, which are not a source of revenue. But obviously then you can look at the condition of those government hospitals and government schools, which are not liked by the general public. So it may be not true, but practically what happens is, if the government is going to get revenue from something, it is going to invest in that part of the economy. So that is missing. Second thing, as Sivakumar ji said, was that in an APMC market, the price discovery was not as good as it should have been. But how, if a farmer, somebody was to come and buy my produce from my farmer, if I was to take it somewhere, what would be the price discovery model for my produce? How would I know what is the price prevailing in the market? I still think that APMC markets will play a primary role in price discovery and farmers knowing how to, if they're selling cheap or not, or they're selling expensive, or are they getting a fair price or not. So it becomes the responsibility of the government to ensure that APMC markets will work. Now, if the central government says that's a responsibility of the state government and state governments don't act on it, then it's not our responsibility. But when I think that the central government makes a rule, makes an ordinance, or passes it in a bill, it's because let's have one thing very clear. These have not yet been passed by parliament. So there is still scope to change it. And I hope that the central government, the agriculture ministry, is open to ideas to tweak these ordinances. They should not take a egoistic stand and say, we've got the best ideas, we've done it, and we will follow it through. So I think we need to have some APMC market. A system requires that APMC markets are supported, so there's a price discovery for farmers. 15 crore farmers are not left to the whims and fancies of traders. That was a problem in the APMC markets also, but it just gets worse with this. If we come to Essential Commodities Act, I think the government has done less. It could have done more. And we still waiting for the fine print to come out. We're waiting for the rules to come out. On the face of it, if you look at, we did some little calculation here in Chandigarh, and we looked at prices of onions. Prices of onions and potatoes rose 100% 21 times in the last 10 years. If you look, price of potato last year was 8 rupees 44 paisa. In May of 2019, the price was 19 rupees 45 paisa. So it's already gone up 100%. And there is no reason for essential commodities to kick in. So, but as we understand the law today, it can actually kick in. So before we jump to conclusions on this, we'll still need to figure out. Now, Essential Commodities Act on its own is not enough. It needs a few clarifications. Like I said, I'll just try and talk about clarification. It says that an exporter can keep stock of whatever orders it has from abroad. That's one of the reasons, one of the stockholding finer points in the act. Now, I'll give you an example of 2000-2004 period when Vajpayee ji's government was there, and Shanta Kumar ji, who based on whose report, Shanta Kumar report, these regulations are coming in. He was, I believe, the minister. The government had 40 lakh tons of wheat stock at that time. And the outside India prices were lucrative. So what the government wanted? The government wanted exports. So they started releasing this stock to the private sector to export. And very quickly, a government realized the stocks were going down. So a movement was started. I mean, a discussion was started to stop these exports. But these traders who were buying from the government in connivance with Food Corporation of India and the ministry, they came back and said that we have export orders from abroad and we need to fulfill those orders. And within 2 years, our stocks of wheat came down from 40 lakh tons to 20 lakh tons. So in the essential commodities amendments that we have, we need to see how are you going to define what is an export order, or what is the export commitment? Should it be an LC, or we should not leave it to the ambiguity of some officers to sit and decide when they want. Now, that was a idea of how essential commodities will work in a surplus thing, a problem that could rise. Now look at what could happen in a deficit situation. Look at what is happening exactly today in the month of June. We're still in June today. We may not be in, today's first, okay? So on 2nd of June, the government comes out with an order saying that Masoor dal import duty has reduced by 30%. Now you look at it, 75% of the pulses consumption is arhar dal, and it is chana. Both are selling below minimum support price, but the government is allowing import of other pulses to that, because that's not the discussion here. Whatever those reasons are can be refuted, and they're wrong. But the idea is that, like Likhi Saab said, that that the government has created a fund of 1 lakh crore rupees, that the private sector will take loans of 1 lakh crore rupees and invest in this sector. Will any trader invest with these provisions in import-export policy provisions, in provisions of how you're going to calculate 50 and 100%? I still think there's a lot of ambiguity. Until these ambiguities are not done away with, I can challenge this government and say that even after 5 years, this 1 lakh crores is not going to be invested. Even in 2018, the government said that we have given 1,10,000 crores for infrastructure. The government has to give away its powers for the private sector to invest. I know ITC is going to invest a huge amount of money, but ITC is one company. How we are looking at a huge investment across the supply chain. So I don't think so this 1 lakh crores is going to be taken up by the private sector in the next 1 or 2 years for investment, because until unless these ambiguities are taken out. Just 2 more points on why should not all stocks kept by warehousing companies? See, because warehousing companies come into play now, because traders can go and buy stuff. Why should they not have electronic warehousing receipts that every evening the government knows what is the stock available? The government imported Masoor because they did not know how, yes, the price was going up, but the price is not necessarily an indication of what stocks have been taken by private traders or what is available. So I think also we must have electronic warehouse, and all traders, all corporate houses are opposing this. I very well know this, they're all opposing this because it allows them to speculate on the price or produce. So to get transparency into the system, Likhi, I sincerely suggest that all warehouses must compulsorily have an electronic warehouse receipt, and it can be done by a cell phone. It does not cost technology, it does not cost money. We already have 400 to 500 such warehouses in UP, I think, which has done very good. And Punjab, I think, so has only 4 because of Punjab's own problems it has. And the post or the Warehouse Development Regulatory Authority, which is important, has been lying vacant for 18 months. It's been lying vacant since January 2018. So if you're going to come out with ordinances, you got to make sure it's there. Now we need to end this. I don't know how much time we have, but one could go on and on speaking on this. But on the Contract Farming Act, my only suggestion is, Likhi Saab, that if ITC wants to do a contract farming within
Mr. Jakhar, you're breaking up. It might help if you could just disable your video. We can hear you then.
He has to do it. ITC cannot get an aggregator in my hometown and make me do a contract with a small goon in my responsibility. And it should be done with the company itself, not with a front man of the company. That's all I want to say. So these are tweakings. If these tweakings are done, the private sector, I am 100% sure, will be able to deliver to farmer needs. But without this tweaking, it's not going to be not going to be easy. And last thing, Likhi, with these ordinances, we need to come out with a system of how do you measure, what is the matrix for measuring success of these ordinances. And I'll give you an example. We have e-commerce today, which we're saying going to create 10 lakh jobs, because you can measure formal jobs created. You will be able to measure how many FPOs you created in the business that you've done. But how do you measure the crores and crores of jobs which are going to be lost of mom and pop stores, of kirana stores, which are not in the formal sector? So we need to have a measurement matrix of seeing what is working, not working. So down the road, some changes can be made. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you so much.
So this is a very fascinating sort of set of 3 opening remarks. I think, hopefully the audience is, enjoying this set of questions. And I can already see like over 100 people have logged in and a pretty active Q&A. So in the interest of time, I won't summarize what people have said. I think, that's for the audience to know what they've said. Let me ask, give, very briefly chance to every panelist to respond very quickly to each other. Maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Likhi. Could you sort of, there are a variety of things that I'm sure that you want to talk about. But let me also add in one question that came in, via a student at ISB. They were very curious about, on one hand, government is doing this, opening up the markets, but on the other hand, they seem to be also increasing minimum support prices. And there seems to be this other parallel discussion that has been coming up about this one district, one crop program, where perhaps procurement might happen, but it's going to be in some regulated fashion. So could you clarify what the government's kind of like long-term thinking is on, on these aspects? If you, and if you want to respond to any of the panelists, views, please do also do that. Thank you. And then I'll ask separate questions to Sivakumar sir and Ajay sir.
And if I may just butt in for 1 second, since we seem to be running short on time, I would request you to keep your responses to within a minute or two.
Yes,
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, the video is something there. Thank you. Okay. So thanks to my co-panelists for their views. Extremely in-depth, insightful, and lots to learn. I can assure Ajay, rather at the first instance inform him that right now we are in an ecosystem in the ministry where deliberation, consultation, opening ourselves to the outside world, to our stakeholders, private sector, farmers is absolutely on. Whatever views he has expressed are very useful, fruitful, and I will take them on board. I've noted all of them. Many of them pertain to the departments of commerce and consumer affairs. Nevertheless, I think one important point which Ajay made was pertaining to vacancies. Now, I have worked in the state government, and absolutely, you are not correct in saying, as far as the extension staff is concerned, or some of our research institutions in the field are concerned, sometimes there are bottlenecks as far as the staff situation or the vacancy situations are concerned. But many states have launched innovative programs, and I know of a program in Haryana and of course a lot of states in southern India where they are supplementing extension workers, through employment exchanges, etc. So that process is on. 1, we will consult. 2, we will take all views on board. 3, wherever any state has any innovative measures taken, whether it's to fill up vacancies or to enhance income by way of an innovation, the ministry always takes note of that. I think Ajay made another, so that's a response to what Ajay said. We will always welcome any feedback. I think one interesting question, Sripad, you mentioned about ODOP, one district, one product. I'd like to clarify, one district, one product is a concept which was announced by the Honorable Finance Minister a few weeks ago. Basically, the concept is that any product in a district which has been viewed as niche in that particular district, or a district has been identified with that commodity. It could be banana, it could be grape, it could be a vegetable, it could be a group of nutri-cereals. We are in the process of absolutely, after consulting state governments, putting together some data on what that likely product, focus product would be for a district. That's the current exercise which is on. It has nothing to do with any other implications which you may think of. So it's only to see if there is a product or a group of products which have a potential in a particular district in terms of having a niche market, or have possibilities of any future exploration, both in terms of the domestic market or exports. ODOP is a concept which pertains to that. With those comments, I think I would request my other panelists to join in. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot once again. So Sivakumar sir, one of the questions that one of the students was also asking on the Q&A was, how do you see sort of agri technology, sort of agri-tech evolving in the next couple of years? And sort of the private sector has an important role, I suppose, to play over here, and at least sort of making that jump. So if you want to respond to that particular question, are there any specific ideas that you see in the space, and potentially do you in your work in the e-Chopal had come across sort of challenges specifically to the land tenure system, maybe the patta system in some areas, is that kind of counterproductive? So as the private sector works in these areas on the technology front, what can you do? And second, outside of these reforms, let's say these reforms were to happen, what other things might there be, that could potentially pose challenges towards private sector sort of really kind of leveraging the best sort of harnessing the true potential of the.
Yeah. So let me pick up the agri-tech question first. There are nearly 500 agri-tech startups, besides lots of agri-tech ventures by many large players, which are dabbling, I would say, in this field. All of them have extraordinary potential in terms of doing a few things from a farmer services point of view. One I talked already about, how do you get the demand signal passed to the farmer for the production system to respond? The second is the angle of how do you get the real-time information on things like weather and all of that coming in for that micro climatic condition of a farmer. And third is how do you personalize the crop management knowledge for the individual farmers. So all these three, it's far easier to combine through the benefit of technology that is possible to improve both the precision farming to conserve resources, as well as potentially deal with any other climate change issues that were also brought up. I mean, obviously, that is the potential. But today, many piecemeal technologies are being attempted. Many of them have a good technology idea, but how does this actually translate from the technology idea into more money in the hands of the farmer? I think that gap still exists for a very large majority of these. I mean, of the 500, I would have personally interacted with over 200. And I would say that about 10 or 15 would be passing the muster in terms of actually seeing that all this technological idea translate into more money into the hands of the farmer. So that is one aspect. But obviously all this work needs to go through to finally deliver that potential. The second challenge that many of the people have is the business model. And how do you really create and capture value for themselves so that you are able to actually scale and survive. So long as there is someone who is investing, it is fine for many of these to experiment with and refine. But how do you create a model to be able to really scale? So I think that also requires a fair amount of effort and hit and miss and trial and error, and all of that will have to happen. So I think the period that we are now seeing is an interesting period of transition when many of these tests will evolve, and to convert them into some kind of a minimum viable products or services for the farmers. And similar thing on the consumer side also. There are many apps which are working on the consumer side, and some of them will need to collaborate. Some of them will have to be riding on the aggregators, like I talked about earlier. Eachopal 4.0 being one of the aggregators, and then several of them that are there is one aspect. And I think one of the important things which will make many of these things happen is the digital agri stack that Dr. Likhi talked about. That a lot of data that is sitting with the government in the form of once the related aspects of what are the privacy issues involved, what are the interoperability issues involved, what are the commercials for the APIs being made available to apps of different service providers and so on. I think as we navigate through this process, I think that will provide the key foundation to be able to translate many of the challenges that I talked about also into solutions. So I think that's the potential, but there's the path which we still need to navigate through to realize that potential. In terms of what else need to happen besides these ordinances and other funds that the government has created and other schemes which are already existing, one, of course, you talked about the whole aspect of tenancy, because many of the schemes are not necessarily available to the actual farmers, but they are available to the landowners. Now, that creates a major dissonance. So that's something which still needs to be sorted out. Many different ideas have been floated, but what needs to eventually get resolved and move forward, I think that certainly is one issue, be it in terms of credit or be it in terms of insurance and be it in terms of many of the subsidies that are being announced, especially if you have to move over to the direct benefit transfer regime. Many of these will mean how do you deal with the tenancy as an issue. If you have to really also get the MSP equivalent in many other products for the farmers through the private institutions, the derivative markets need to get deepened. Some of them, of course, its derivative is not possible in every commodity, but where it is possible, so that when I am offering through my own farming agreement with a farmer, literally an options embedded forward contract. I'm saying this is the minimum price that I'm offering you. The price comes down, you will still get this. The price goes up, I will pay the current market price for all or part of the produce as the contract is defined, which means that I need to offload that risk somewhere else. See, compared to one farmer, a sponsor may have a larger risk appetite and risk-bearing ability. But when you add up 1 million farmers, obviously that kind of capacity doesn't exist on part of any enterprise. So it requires a market mechanism to offload that risk. And that's what the derivative markets are supposed to be. I think another important reform which has been done by the government a few months ago is the options devolving on the physical goods. Earlier, options were only devolving on the futures. And because our futures market themselves were evolving, it became difficult for options to become liquid. But now the new reform which has been done is to devolve it on the physical goods. And of course, it's currently being used more in commodities like metals, not yet in agri-produce of any meaningful scale. But that I see also as a far-reaching reform to actually transfer and create this price forecasting mechanism and the price hedging mechanism for the value chain player, so that in turn you are able to offer it to the farmer. I think that is another important other thing which has to form part of the ecosystem to really see the benefit of many of these reforms, the reality of the day.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Just very quickly, just to also get your thoughts into this, into the discussion. This is also linked to one of the questions that was asked, is being asked online, which is, there is this relationship. It seems like, at least, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the long-term vision is to have some sort of direct relationship between the farmer and either the private sector or farmer and the government. Like, we have a sort of a large sort of numbers of middlemen, that come in the picture. And so I know while you cannot speak on the behalf of the Arthiyas, because you are, in the end of the day, sort of doing business mostly, mostly with them, how do you see these ordinances kind of affecting their, their business? You have written about, how it probably benefits the traders specifically, but I think anything that you want to add on that front That is one, question that I wanted to ask. And the second would be that you had mentioned, this good example of the SEBI, and how SEBI has some regulation for, commercial trading. But, if you do add like, a couple of, points on specifically how you would regulate, I mean, at one hand, you want to do away with regulation, but on the other hand, we still want to protect the farmers so that they are not, they are not sort of taken for a ride. What would those specific concrete ideas be, if you can share? We only have a couple of minutes, but if you can share maybe in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
I'll do a speed run on this to save time. First of all, there was a question about Artiyas. I think just as farmers will need to be supported in perpetuity, irrespective of which government and what program comes. Let's be very practical on this. Similarly, Artiyas will stay in the farming system in perpetuity, irrespective of what happens. Their form may change, their competition may change, corporate houses will also become Artiyas, but Artiyas and middlemen and aggregators, they're all same in differences. They will always stay. Let's be very fair on this. And to say that the corporate houses will buy directly from farmers is never going to happen. Even corporate houses are going to use middlemen and aggregators to procure for them. If you look at Reliance Retail, you look at Future, you look at Jio, Facebook, whatever is coming in, Walmart is coming in. They will never buy from farmers directly. They will still use aggregators, who you could call middlemen, who you could call Artiyas. We should be very clear on this. I think so. There was a question I saw on contract farming. I don't want to spend time on contract farming because it's the most inconsequential of the reforms here, because in terms of number of people, livelihoods which will contract farm with private sector, let's say 10 years from now, or the percentage of area which will be under contract farming 10 years from now will be minuscule to even spend time on it. I personally think we didn't need a contract farming act, and this is something that the industry will agree with. We really didn't need one. There's a contract act in the legal framework of the Constitution, and it is good enough, I think. So I will not spend time on contract farming because I think it's too small a player to have a. And contracts are basically going to work on trust between the private sector. So when ITC has contract farming for potatoes, the subsidiary has contract farming for potatoes, farmers are very happy with doing that contract, and they just don't need a legal framework for it. So I think these are just 2 points I would want to say. Other than that, I don't know. If you are asking something, for example, if you want some sort of a regulation, I say when you're selling outside the APMC market, just a suggestion, when you're selling outside the APMC market, it should be compulsory that farmers get paid the same day by cash or by electronic transfer. Why 3 days? The guy with a PAN card is going to run away. Who are they going to run after for the payment for? And they can't go to an SDM. The SDM will then make a committee, and the committee will call a farmer. The farmer doesn't have that bandwidth to fight the corporate houses or fight the aggregator or something. So I'm definitely, you said that I'm against regulation. No, I am for regulation. That regulation needs to be governed better. I think so. Politicians have let us down, farmers, and that is the problem. They have allowed the system to take, every government, including this government, has very good intentions of delivering. As a farmer, that's not important it's not important for me. Delivery is important for me. And for that, we need some sort of regulation. Thank you.
Great. So I think a very lively discussion. I'll hand over to Sripad, maybe,
Thank you, speakers. This was a very interesting session, and I think we are over time already, and I apologize for going over time. If you could bear with me for a few more minutes, I'd like to wrap up the discussion with some insights that were generated, and hopefully which will give us a direction for the way forward. So the way I look at it, these reforms seem to be a first step towards achieving the objectives of improving farmer welfare in the long run. They're also favorable in terms of allowing private sector enterprises such as ITC and others to even start considering large-scale investments, as it removes some of the ambiguities and uncertainties and makes returns on these investments more predictable. With that said, as Mr. Jakhar pointed out, there are still many ambiguities related to the regulations governing these reforms, and it would be helpful if the rules that come for the implementation of these reforms take care of these ambiguities and make them clearer so that everyone knows what's in it for them. The other thing that Mr. Jakhar pointed out was it's not just these 3 reforms and about trade, contract farming, and Essential Commodities Act, but there are many other regulations. For instance, the import-export regulations governing agricultural commodities, which needs to be streamlined for this to have an impact for farmers and the agricultural value chains in general. And one of the suggestions was to enable an electronic warehousing stock information system, which allows a real-time visibility into what the stock position is, and therefore allows for when should imports be curtailed, when can it be allowed, and so on and so forth. As Dr. Likhi pointed out, these are all good suggestions, and these are all good inputs to the government when it comes to paving the way forward. And he's promised us that these will be looked into, and the government will consider these as it frames the rules. Some of the other issues that came up was, and this was something that Dr. Likhi himself pointed out in his opening remarks, is that these are decentralized commodities. There are different regions in India which are geared towards producing different agricultural commodities. And so a one size will not fit all. And therefore states need to be consulted, and states will be consulted when mapping districts for individual agricultural commodities and forming these clusters which would enable procurement and cultivation at scale. As Mr. Sivakumar pointed out, this will make agricultural supply chains more demand responsive and therefore allow farmers to make better decisions, hopefully avoiding glut in the market of different commodities and therefore enabling to achieve better prices. Of course, all of this is subject to having better governance and dispute resolution mechanisms for farmers, which is especially favorable to farmers, so that it's an asymmetric relationship at the end of the day, because you're dealing with large numbers of small and marginal farmers, and on the other hand, you have large corporate buyers. Some of the things that these reforms probably don't address in their current form are the issues related to tenant farmers who don't own the land. It's not clear how their welfare is going to be accounted for and will be taken care of come time to implement these reforms. There was some discussion, and this was something that Dr. Likhi also pointed out, is the development of a digital agri stack, which would allow for tech to take a larger role in improving agricultural value chains and complemented with platforms such as eChopal 4.0. These can reach farmers more efficiently and lead to better value in the agricultural supply chains. Hopefully, many of the audience questions were answered as part of the discussion. If there are questions that remain unanswered, we apologize for that, and feel free to write to us as the moderators, and we'll try and seek responses from the panelists. So with that, we would like to conclude, but before I do that, I do want to thank some of the people who work behind the scenes to make today's session possible. First of all, thank you, speakers, for taking time out from your busy schedules to provide us valuable insights on the issues that are involved. I would like to thank Kumar Guru from the External Relations teams at ISB for helping us get in touch with the speakers and organize today's session. We would also like to thank the JumpStart India at ISB team for providing a platform to discuss these important issues of relevance to the national interest and importance, especially given the current tough times that everyone's going through. Today's session would not have been possible without the effort of a lot of people working behind the scenes to organize the logistics. So a big thanks to Prashant Srivastava from the External Relations team, Arushi Jain and Isha Mahajan from the Bharati Institute of Public Policy and JumpStart India at ISB team, the IT and audiovisual team at the ISB Mohali campus for coordinating the logistics and ensuring a smooth conduct for the sessions. And thanks finally to all of you audience members for your active participation and making this session a success. So we hope you all stay safe and look forward to seeing all of you at future events of JumpStart India at ISB. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
for your time.
Privileged to be a part. Thank you.
Thank you.